Welcome to the NABS podcast, your essential listening for mental wellness at work. This is where we find out how leaders across our industry take care of their mental wellness and that of their teams. Together, we'll get refreshed and inspired. I can't wait to start chatting. This week, our guest is Bruce Daisley. Bruce Daisley is a writer, consultant, and one of the UK's most influential voices on the intersection of life and work. His research into better working practices has featured in publications including The Guardian, Telegraph, Wired UK, Washington Post, Harvard Business Review, and The Wall Street Journal. His podcast, Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat, has been an Apple #1 business podcast and has featured psychologists, neuroscientists, and workplace experts. It's also a really good listen. I'm a fan. He was previously the European Vice President for Twitter, the firm's most senior employee outside of the US. Bruce's latest book, Fortitude, is out now. It's so good. And like every 3 pages, I just had to stop and think, wow, Bruce is really smart. So if you're up for an intellectual challenge, but also you want to learn some stuff about Fortitude, you should definitely read the book. So welcome, Bruce. How are you?
That's a really nice, the comment about the book is strongly appreciated. Thank you.
Oh, well, you're welcome. And I think that there were some really great points in it about the power of community and how your childhood experiences can shape you going forward. So there's some really fascinating stuff there, and we'll come on to some of that in the discussion. But given that NABS are all about mental wellness, and I know it's a really passionate subject of yours as well, let's go in with the first question. What does mental wellness look like to you?
Yeah, I think we're probably coming to terms with it a bit more than we ever have before. You know, I certainly think that it's probably these people who joined the workforce, who went through college, who never really reflected on their state of mental wellness, and only latterly now seeing that others are having some considerations for these things. I'm a big tennis fan, and it's really interesting that in the last few weeks, there's an American tennis player called Amanda Anisimova who has sort of pulled out of tennis and sort of pulled out of the tour, saying that her mental health is struggling. And people who are interested in tennis, before Anisimova, there was Naomi Osaka, who did the same. And, you know, both of them citing mental health issues is something that I don't think anyone had done in previous eras, but there've definitely been tennis players in previous eras that have opted to take a break from the sport. And it's just because we didn't put a label to it. Probably one of the greatest tennis players of all time, Bjorn Borg, retired at 26. And yet possibly we might say there was a mental health reason for that. But in the time, in the 1980s, it was not something that was even considered. So I think a lot of us are finding that discussions of mental health are rising on the agenda. And look, what it looks like, I think, is entirely subjective. So what good mental health looks like is whether you feel like you're experiencing strong mental health. I think my view is probably that there are origins that underpin most strong mental health. And the mistake that we can make, I think the perspective I take, is that thinking that somehow the origin of these things is somehow individual, or that some of us have and some of us don't have. And I think, in my view, it's far more complicated than that. And it's why an organisation like NABS actually have got a really important role to play.
That point about it being an individual thing is really important, both in terms of you might be the only one who's experiencing a challenge, which is just, we know that's not the case. Everyone's on this continuum, aren't they, of mental wellness, but also in terms of how we rise to any mental wellness challenges or just support ourselves ongoing. So in Fortitude, which everyone has to read, you talk about the importance of community helping us to thrive, which is something NABS is really passionate about. The importance of community to come together to find solutions and to support each other. So how do you think we can go about building that community that supports mental wellness, both in hard times and also for something that you write about in Fortitude, which really resonated with me, this notion of shared joy? So in the book, you use the Hebrew word simcha, which I was interested in because I'm from a Jewish background, I'm Jewish. Simcha is really specifically those joyous moments that you share together as a community. So we call events such as bar mitzvahs and weddings, we refer to them as simchas. because you can only really experience the joy of those when you have your friends and your family and your community with you. So it makes sense that community is important for thriving, and you really go hard and long on that in the book. So how can we practically go about that, especially in these post-pandemic times where people are still like working from home, or maybe they're feeling more socially
Well,
anxious?
to take a step back, because it was such a beautiful setup, that maybe to sort of to stay take a step back to maybe add substance to what you're saying. There's been no shortage of people who've looked for another sort of resilience, an individual form of resilience. So the US military has got this pretty big existential challenge that more soldiers die from their own hands than die from enemy combat. And so they've got this huge issue with people sort of taking their own lives when they finish service. So they've spent $1 billion in training and equipping soldiers, combat veterans, with dealing with this. And the great thing that when a piece of work has been undertaken that's of that ambition and that scale, other people will come in and say, well, let's check if it worked. Because truly, if they've unlocked the panacea, the way to unleash resilience on the rest of us, then great. Actually, where's the limit? Let's train everyone on this. And the truth is that people have gone and analyzed it and said that this training has had zero impact. So they spent $1 billion in the pursuit of individual resilience, and it hasn't worked. Additionally, there's been school programs. Schools around the world are trying to instill resilience in kids. And similarly, people who've gone out and said, let's replicate these programs. Let's see if they work. Let's see results they get. Broadly, sort of big surveys of all of the studies have said, oh, this doesn't work. It doesn't have any achievement. So effectively, you've got this notion that of individual resilience, that some of us have got it. There's almost like a switch for resilience. People have gone out and tried to prove it with as much resource as I think we could reasonably muster. And they've said it doesn't work. In parallel with that, there's no shortage of evidence to suggest the opposite, to suggest that resilience is a collective strength, that resilience is the strength we draw from each other. I was looking at some data this morning that is in Fortitude, but I was just looking at it for a presentation about people who are hospitalized, and they can be hospitalized for a major operation or for an episode of mental health, poor mental health. And actually, there's a common thread that runs through it. Their welfare and their well-being after 2 years and 5 years is largely predicted by how many social groups they report feeling part of. Really strange thing. Why, most of us would say, if presented with that evidence, would say, well, isn't that kind of irrelevant? If someone's a member of a a group that goes to watch football, or a group that does cycling, or a group that t- goes to do hobby crafts, why on earth would that predict their health? But there's something strange, something innate, that human beings seem to be social, and feeling connected to other people seems to be transformative. And I think it has huge implications for any of us thinking about mental health. The direct application that I've made of this is that I was probably, especially in the sort of post-pandemic era, I was probably one of those people who sort of left friendships to chance. That, if someone contacted me saying, do you want to go out to lunch, or do you want to go out and do something, I would reply, but I would never initiate. And what I've done, what I've really tried to focus on is try and think about all of those groups I'm part of, or all of those relationships I've got, and try and initiate more regular contact with them. I've tried to be someone used the phrase to me of in your social life, you should try to be the sherpa. You should try to be the person who leads the way. And I've set about trying to do that, really try and sort of instill those things. So I think, if I was going to summarize it, I would say the mistake we make about resilience is thinking that it's the fact that we don't feel it is our fault. And actually, the only times we ever experience resilience is when we feel connected and emboldened by the people around us. So for me, that's the way that I've tried to reinvent my own life personally.
So it's simply by being part of an active community, whatever that looks like, that your mental wellness is bolstered. It's not necessarily the case that that group has to be doing something active that specifically bolsters mental wellness, but just by dint of being part of a group, you can feel better and therefore have more fortitude.
Yeah, and there's really interesting evidence on this. So, most of us, if you've still got a grandmother, most of us, if you heard that your grandmother was going to be doing aerobics or any sort of exercise, you go, oh, fantastic, strongly supportive. But what you find is that actually researchers have said, let's measure the impact of that physical exercise. And they've found that the benefit that old people get from doing exercise is directly replicated by other old people getting together in just a social grouping. Actually, the magic isn't the aerobics. The magic is being part of a group. So yeah, the aerobics group is enhancing for them, but actually we seem to get almost all of the benefits from just being a participant. So, whether they're in a storytelling or nostalgia group or a group that talks about the good old days, those things seem to have as much benefit as getting on, putting on your leotard and kicking your legs up for half an hour. So there seems to be inexplicably, there seems to be a magic that exists that um, emboldens us, enacts greater mental well-being. And, look, I don't think it necessarily is easy to explain, but I think we instinctively feel it when we participate in something, when we feel a collective link to the people around us. It seems to be really enhancing. You see lovely examples of it. If you get strangers together and put them in a choir and get them to sing together, people's endorphin levels go off the charts. There seems to be something about feeling connected to other people and especially sort of feeling like we're synchronized with them, that seems to have a magical effect on us.
So, if you're not currently part of a community or you're feeling a bit post-pandemic isolated, anxious still, it seems to me it's a question of just finding something that floats your boat, that has a community attached to it, and just going and joining in and finding some solace in people that way.
Yeah, and look, it might be a really simple thing. It might be that you've got two or three friends that you used to work with, and you get that group together, and you just make sure that on a regular basis you meet up with those people. Or it might be that you've got an interest or a passion that other people don't share, and you want to get together with like-minded friends. The thing that seems to be most enriching is feeling part of two or three of these things. So you might even say, it's sometimes included in the research, sometimes isn't, but you might feel like you've got a lovely bond with your family and friends. And so you want to you call your family one of your groups, your friends one of your groups. Most of us have got like a group of friends that maybe we either studied with or went to school with or worked with a few jobs ago. And that's one of the things that I've been really focused on. I organised another reunion of former colleagues. I already run one reunion of former colleagues. And I've just realised that, look, these things are so um, cheering when they happen that actually sort of being the person who initiates them is not a bad thing.
It's easy to be the sherpa when you've got beautiful people around you to sherp.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But look, and I recognize that from my own mind, I knew that I was missing this degree of connection, not being around people as much. I was missing this degree of connection and thought, I wanted to try to initiate those things. So, that for me is the fascinating lesson about this. Is the lovely evidence of this in research as well. There was something really charming that I was really taken with. It was during the start of the pandemic. One of the world's leading experts on teenage mental well-being is a woman who sort of studies teenagers. She just had a book out last week, actually, in America. It's coming to the UK in June. A woman called Jean Twenge, and she studies sort of teenagers and how they're dealing with life in the internet era. And it's fair to say that she's worried about it. She sort of shares anxious research about how it's going. But one of the things she did observe is in the start of the pandemic, when teenagers were when everyone was locked down, when we were in that era of the pandemic where maybe you were turning your hand to making some bread, you were doing a jigsaw puzzle for the as, to the astonishment that you never thought you'd find yourself doing these things. That first 6 or 8 weeks of the pandemic, she found that teenagers who were reported having an evening meal with their families every night saw their resilience increase and their depression decline. Wow. Actually, it's baffling when you think about that. Why on earth would, in a period, would they feel that way? But they felt that they were just more connected to their siblings or their parents or their step parents, their carers. They just felt that connection seemed to elevate them and protect them. And I think there's such powerful lessons in that. For me, the feeling of, I guess, the absence of resilience, that helpless anxiety, is quite often a really difficult thing for any of us to bear, because the challenge in that moment when we feel like that is that we don't know what to do. That uncertainty can produce a degree of helplessness. One of the things I really take issue with the people who've introduced resilience training is that if you look through some of the guidance and the suggestions they give, is they would say in that case there, and it's based on a very famous American psychologist called Martin Seligman. But they would say, one of the things you should do if you're not feeling resilience is reframe the bad things in your life and think about the good things in your life. And to me, that's such victim blaming, because it's suggesting to someone that you're feeling depressed, you're feeling anxious, you're feeling isolated. Hang on. Well, think about all the good things in your life. It's like, that's not helpful right now, actually. And actually, I really see that as toxic. I see that as sort of, especially when some of the people who've been subjected to this training have been combat soldiers who've come back from deep trauma of war. And they're being told, look, the problem with you is you're dwelling on all the negative things you experienced. I can't help but feel a little bit angry and frustrated about that. If, on the other hand, you said to people, look, the thing that gets other people through these dark moments is a sense of connection. I saw a beautiful thing, which was a poet called David White. He says the gift of friendship is to feel understood by someone, and in turn to know that you understand them. It's like, wow, that's exactly right. When any of us feel like maybe the bad things we've experienced are understood by other people, or that actually, the things we're going through we're not alone in experiencing them, it's far more helpful than sitting there and writing a list of 20 reasons to be cheerful when you're in the middle of a sort of a depressive episode. And so, I think for me, most certainly, I've really reflected on these things and tried to adapt my own life in that way, really.
So, for any managers listening to this and thinking about what they can do to support the wellness of their teams, the mental wellness of their teams, is it about listening and forming a bond and forming a community with them and with the team? Are those actions at the basis of it? And is there anything else that they should be thinking about in order to give that support system?
Look, I think there's something interesting in that thing that we wince and hesitate about thinking about now, which is pub culture. And we all sort of shrink away from it because we recognise what's wrong with it. But if we analyse what was right about organisations that talked about pub culture, it can be instructive and it can help us in a sort of more enlightened perspective to work out what we could do right. So the thing where pub cultures go well is that generally, the biggest predictor of whether someone is engaged with their job is whether they've got a friend at work. Generally, it's our social connections to people around us that seem to be the thing that give us life. And pub cultures achieve that. Now, what do we also recognize about pub cultures? A culture built on alcohol consumption after hours generally is quite cliquey because only a subgroup of the office attend there. Other parts of the office don't want to come, or they don't have the time, the money, or the desire, the sort of the interest in doing that. But what we can recognise is when people get together and connect socially, it seems to be something that produces a benefit for the organisation. What we also probably recognise is asking people to do that in their own personal time is, in an era where there's already a lot of demands and work is already fully enmeshed in our lives, asking people to stay late and do that doesn't feel right. But then you start thinking, okay, are there any things then that maybe in the old days where we'd have had a team bonding session or a team strategy day, could we do something that creates these social connections between team members? Now, you probably have to do it obliquely. So if you said, we're going to have an afternoon just talking to each other, I suspect most of the team would say, I'm too busy for this. I haven't got time for this. So you've got to think about a way to do it that's going to accomplish the same goal, but without necessarily being explicitly like, we're just going to have a team conversation session. And so just thinking about that, knowing that, look, social connection between team members seems to be enhancing. Knowing that doing that outside of work hours or just relying on booze probably isn't a progressive way to think about it. So I chatted to some people who run a storytelling night called The Moth. And they run this storytelling night that you can sort of turn up and see true stories told live. So their idea is you turn up somewhere, you turn up at a place in Shoreditch, and you'll see people stand up and tell a story for 10 minutes. And you can. There's an open mic slot that you can set up and do it. And I loved their book, which is How to Tell a Story. But I saw in their book that they mentioned that they run corporate sessions. And I was just curious. I was like, okay, well, what is this corporate session? Is it to teach people how to tell better PowerPoint, to sort of deliver slides better? And I said to them, so how do you do that? What's the philosophy there? And they said to me, look, yes, anyone developing storytelling skills is going to be beneficial elsewhere. But the objective actually is that when we've sat down and Louisa's told her story about her experience when she was 17 and how it changed her life, then immediately we're all in a room where suddenly the backstory of each of us has been established. And suddenly we're transformed into these three-dimensional characters that maybe we, through busyness, through demands of work, through the fact that we don't sit next to each other 5 days a week, we'd never drawn out those details. And so they said, effectively, it just brings some degree of humanity to work. The great thing is you can present that to people as, listen, we think it's beneficial for us all to learn how to tell better stories. But so the covert objective feels like, okay, well, that seems like it's a sort of business relevant skill for everyone to have. But really, so the overt objective is that, but the covert objective is let's get to know each other and feel like we care about each other and how we're getting on. And I loved that because I saw something else which someone said that, the job of a modern middle manager, really difficult job. A middle manager's jobs are becoming harder and harder and harder. But someone said the job of a middle manager now is to be entrepreneurial about connection. How can you make team members feel connected to each other? And here's one of the challenges is that if we were in a room together with 10 people, we'd make sure that we had an individual conversation with everyone in that room in the course of a day together. You'd feel like by the end of the day, I've still not gone over and chatted to this colleague or that colleague. And yet when we're on Zoom calls, we kind of feel like we've done that by addressing the screen, but we've not built that depth of relationship. And I think, that idea of managers being entrepreneurial about fostering connections, not only between themselves and their team members, but between each member of the group, I think is probably how middle manager skills are evolving and the demands upon managers are evolving.
Well, NABS would definitely agree with that. Middle managers they're a key area of the workforce that we're looking to support because they have all of the demands from above, but then they've got all of the demands from their teams as well. And that's not just about work now. That emotional piece, that mental wellness piece is huge. And people are quite rightly expecting mental wellness support from their managers, but the managers don't necessarily have the toolkit yet to be able to do that because, as you said at the top of our conversation, mental wellness is understood differently now to how it used to be. And we've all got to get to grips with that and understand how we can support people effectively. So I think
Yeah.
I know what you're going to say to the next question, but you could surprise me. What's one thing we could all do to support our mental wellness this week? And I'm thinking join a choir, join a book group, find your tribe, find your people. Would that be your answer?
Yeah, it probably would, but it might be to think about what tribes you're already a part of and you've not been sustaining. So it might be, I'm going out on Friday with just 4 people who are used to sit on a bank of desks with. So it's a really simple one. It's just like a little group of us who were a group that used to laugh together all day. And so, it doesn't feel like anything august. It doesn't feel like I'm joining the Highgate Harriers running club. There's nothing that I'm necessarily doing anything that requires admin or discomfort, but it's just about trying to seek and rekindle those connections that probably all of us have got to some degree, and trying to keep them active and regular, really. So, just trying to think about the groups you're already a part of that you've neglected. And I think that would probably be my start point on it.
I'm very happy to hear this because today my team organised our next team lunch. So we're going to go out in a couple of weeks and we're already looking forward to it. We've chosen what we're going to eat. And then a couple of weeks after that, I am going for lunch with my teammate Lewis, who produces this podcast. And we're going to have a very important discussion soon about where to go. We really look forward to that because we've really bonded over food, our team. There's two things we like doing: eating and having a laugh. So we know that when we give ourselves these team lunches to look forward to, we can do both.
And there's an important lesson in that, isn't there? If you've got like an old reunion of people that you used to know 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the first thing you recognize is that there's a degree of curation in it. You generally don't say, here's what we're doing. We're meeting at this all bar one on Thursday at 6:30. You don't do that. You say, we're doing something. It's got to feel like an occasion. I think, understanding that that curation. I don't know if you know that book by Priya Parker, The Art of Gathering, and actually it's more a concept than a book, really. I mean, there's the whole book there, but it's one of those books where you've got it a few chapters in. But it's the notion of create a gathering that's got a rule to it, create a gathering that's got a reason for it, create a gathering that's got a specific invite list to it, and so as a result of that, she says in that, people will say to her, oh, look, we're having this reunion of people and someone wants to bring their partner. And she's like, well, no, that's not what this group is. So if you want to create a different group for that, yes, but we are specifically trying to curate an experience here. And it's like she says, often you have to create rules that people are uncomfortable with to make a moment feel special. Now, whether you agree or disagree with some of it, it's a really interesting way to rethink and reform. So, team lunches quite often will be that people will say, we're going to the place across the road or the place up the street, and we're going there, and either it's going to be, old school, a boozy style lunch, and it's a one-off, or we're going to do. And it seems a little bit accidental. Whereas if you say, we're having a lunch, we're going to this place, we're doing this, in the afternoon afterwards, we're going to spend a couple of hours working through some ideas, it develops a different energy to it. And I think thinking about those things a bit more intentionally probably will have a transformational impact, I think.
And that's really good for your mental wellness as well. I listened to Priya Parker be interviewed a couple of years ago, and it was fascinating. And what came through for me was the importance of setting those boundaries
Mm.
when you're organising social gatherings. Like you just said, oh no, the gathering's not for this. If you want to bring your partner, that's another gathering. And that boundaries piece, and I always end up coming back to boundaries on this podcast, is so important for your mental wellness, because if you say to your teammates or whichever group you've identified, let's get together, and someone says, well, let's go to the pub, but you're not drinking, and you're not drinking for good reasons, then actually saying, well, no, let's be really firm about where we can go, that we're all going to feel comfortable, is a really important piece to sustain your mental wellness. Otherwise, you may end up going to the pub and feeling really compromised because it's not a space that you're happy in.
Precisely that. And, quite often people go to the pub because they want to create something that feels different. But if you said, like, the way we're doing that is that we're going to eat different food, we're going to eat Malaysian food, we're going to eat some food that none of us have, and you turn the novelty element from being something booze related into something cuisine related, then immediately it's got a focus. It feels like a different moment, but it works in a different way. So, I would suggest that probably all of us challenging ourselves a little bit more away from some of the obvious and predictable things. And look, this goes back to why the job of middle manager is harder than ever before. This could be for a middle manager something they delegate to the team. So they say, look, here's the rule. We want to do something that's within 20 minutes of the office. We're going to spend the afternoon, so we need to go somewhere afterwards. There's going to be no drink involved. And then give that brief to a team member. The challenge is, I think a lot of people might say, oh, this is just a waste of time. But it's just the recognition that, back to those things that I mentioned, the thing that makes people most engaged in their job is whether they've got a friend at work. Feeling like you've got a connection with your teammates seems to be one of the biggest things that predicts work outcomes and work productivity. I was looking at some research by Gallup. Gallup a sort of global workforce survey, and one of the things they say is that in teams that are motivated, generally their productivity is significantly higher. But they describe smiling and being happy all day. They describe sort of often feeling like they have a laugh with teammates. And those things don't happen by accident, I think. So, okay, let's work on the basis that we're in the office far less than we used to be. How can we use the time that we are together in a more, I think, productive and relationship building way?
One thing that we're really keen on is supporting yourself so that you prevent getting to a crisis point. But at the same time, at NABS, we do help people who have got to a crisis point. What's a big tip you can give to people to help themselves or to get help before they get to that point where they really are feeling desperate?
Yeah, I think it's look. The critical things are quite often when people are feeling in that state. It's often a reflection that they feel a lack of personal control. They feel like events are conspiring to put them into a helpless state. I guess if you accept that as an opposition, helpless or control, and there's a scale that runs from those things. Normally, people are in their worst mental health state when they feel a total helplessness. They feel a total absence of control, and so firstly, actually diagnosing that is a really helpful thing. By someone pointing out, okay, you often feel like this when you feel like you've got no control over the things happening to you. Actually, one of the first things that you can recognize is, oh, well, there are some things that control. One of the first things that we first recognize then when we were given that opposition, we go, okay, well, I can stop doing a few things. I can, I feel overwhelmed by the amount of meetings I've got. Actually, I'm going to tell my boss that I'm not going to attend this one, and this one. Or actually, I feel overwhelmed by the burden of work I've got. I'm going to tell my boss, actually, I'm not going to be online tomorrow because I just want to get this big project done, whatever it is. But I think the very framework that enables you to think about that opposition, control, or helplessness gives you some leverage to realize, okay, I need to take steps to mitigate it. And I think that's what I would say. I would say that often the ability to diagnose these challenges gives us the opportunity then to recognize, okay, well, now I know why I'm in this situation. And that can go for a lot of things. People's anxiety can come from helplessness in their relationship, financial helplessness at work. They might feel that their relationship with their boss is toxic and they feel set upon. These are unreasonable demands. Now, look, you can't solve all of those things by diagnosing it, but I think recognizing the reason why I feel this way is a direct relationship to that at least helps you to work it out. The amount of people who say to me, my life is characterized by my calendar being back-to-back meetings all day. And I look at it on a Sunday night and I think I can't cope with the week ahead. Right. That's a really interesting observation that I think, look, for a lot of people, that's the reality of work right now. But at least it enables you to work out, okay, if I was able to carve out a couple of hours, maybe on Wednesday morning or Friday morning, where I could get something done, would it help me feel a little bit better? I remember seeing some research that really studied people whose whole life was overwhelmed by work. It studied sort of management consultants, and they asked these management consultants to take one night a week away from their devices, one night a week off email. So it really seems like a small step. And to make them do it, they asked them to commit to do it for the team benefit. So if anyone breached this and went on emails one night when it was their night to be off emails, then the whole team would fail in this little project they were doing. What happened was that people reported, oh, I had a date night, or I had a nice night. I went to the movies. I didn't look at my phone. And they reported feeling more connected to their jobs, more inspired by their jobs. And look, I think probably a lot of us, I often talk about meeting free days, this idea that teams might agree to have one day a week with no meetings in the calendar. And the first thing that people say when I suggest it, they say, it wouldn't work here. It wouldn't work here. But if you are able to get some of these like slight adaptations to the way we work. Generally, people report their engagement levels, their happiness levels, their stress levels, all are positively enhanced. So I just think often getting some degree of control, no matter how small, has a disproportionate impact on our mental well-being.
Yeah, both nodding along here to that sense of control and having some space for yourself is just invaluable, isn't it? What's a lesson that you've learned about how to support yourself?
And that resilience is a team sport, I think, really, that, that all of us are stronger than any of us. And that if you think about resilience as a collective thing, and that goes for just workplace culture. Workplace culture is better if people feel connected to each other. And just thinking about devices to do that is then becomes an added nuance of the job. Previous generations of managers got away without doing this, or they got away with, demanding that the team worked hard, and then on Thursdays or alternative Fridays, taking everyone down the pub. And it was like, it was so simple. There was no effort that went into it. And the truth was that it didn't always work then either. It just, no one really took the time to work out who was there and who wasn't there. Or, the people who didn't come down the pub were seen as the team squares. And so, we've evolved to an era where actually we can do something better than that learns the lessons from it, I think. And understanding that resilience and team culture are a collective thing, I think, is probably the big lesson that I've got.
I really want to be in a book group or some such with you, Bruce, where we can experience the power of community, and also I can listen to some more from you. I could listen to you all day.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. And it's a good point to say that a lot of what NABS offers in terms of our support services are built around community. So whether you come to one of our exploratory workshops or attend a talk, it's also a chance to get together with people across the industry, to meet some people you might not ordinarily meet, and to form some connections, all in the hope of bolstering your mental wellness. So in the meantime, it just remains me to thank Bruce massively. Remember to go and read Fortitude. It is a stonking read. And Bruce, you are welcome at one of my simchas anytime. Thank you so much for today.
I love it. What a lovely chat. Thank you.